Em meio às torres medievais da Universidade de Cambridge, no mesmo prédio onde um dia deu aulas o reverenciado economista britânico John Maynard Keynes, trabalha hoje o sul-coreano Ha-Joon Chang, pesquisando e orientando alunos de pós-graduação em economia. Ele é autor de 2 best-sellers nesta área de conhecimento: Derrubando a Escada e 23 Coisas que Não Nos Contam sobre o Capitalismo. O primeiro livro já lançado no Brasil, o outro a sair este ano. Chang é o que se costuma chamar de economista heterodoxo. Não segue a cartilha habitual de reverência ao chamado mercado livre, que ele compara à teologia católica na Europa medieval, quer distância dos conceitos que sustentam o neoliberalismo. Ele acredita em política industrial e diz que todos os países ricos a adotaram com vigor na fase de ascensão e continuam a adotá-la disfarçadamente. Chang critica até a sua própria especialidade de economista, recheada de tantos fracassos que, como ele diz em tom de piada, mas nem tanto, se fosse outra profissão, já teria sido banida e seus praticantes enforcados.
As we know, there have been several attempts to try to explain the current financial and economic crisis we're going through, and there seems to be, well, at least 2 theories. One says that the system failed completely. It just didn't work. And the other says, no, the capitalist system, the free market works. It does work, and it just needs a bit of touching here and there, a bit of regulations. What's your take? Is the system rotten, or is it still the good system?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm somewhere in between, because I'm one of those people who believe that, yes, capitalism has lots of problems, but as a system, that is, at least as yet, the best economic system that the humanity has invented. But the kind of capitalism that we have had in the last 3 decades, this neoliberal free market capitalism, that's what has failed. And we obviously need to do certain things to get that right. But I think also there's a bit of a problem in saying that, well, the basic system is okay, it's only the regulation that didn't work. Because in the end, regulation is what defines what the system is, you know. I mean, until 1888, was it, in Brazil, it was totally legal to buy and sell human beings. Yeah? When you introduce exactly the regulation that you cannot do that, they basically abolished the market in slaves. In the same way, you could argue that there were too many complex financial derivatives which were basically dysfunctional. I mean, they were good for making money for people who deal with them, but bad for the rest of the society. So we could arguably say that we should abolish those markets. That's also regulation, but then you are actually changing the system with those regulations. I think, yes, I mean, we have to accept that the system has failed, but we need to be clear about exactly what has failed. Is it capitalism in general? Or is it this particular variety of free market capitalism that has been practiced in the last 30 years?
In your writings and lectures, you've indicated that this form of capitalism that has developed in recent years seems obsessed with maximizing short-term profit for shareholders, focusing too much on giving dividends to these shareholders. And then every quarter we have to examine the profits and all that. Okay, so you criticize that. It is a nerve-wracking thing. But isn't that what companies do anyway, private companies do anyway?
Well, that's what we have been told is the case. But, you know, this form of capitalism, what is sometimes known as shareholder capitalism, based on the belief that the shareholders own the company and the company managers have to do everything to please their shareholders. This is actually something new. Not even in the United States, which is the home of this idea of shareholder capitalism. Companies have been giving away so much of their profits to shareholders, you know, until the 1960s. American companies used to give out 40, maybe 50% of their profits to shareholders in the form of dividends and share buybacks. In the recent period, American companies have basically given away 95% of their profits to the shareholders. So they have very little money to invest, and they fall behind in the technology, and then they lose competitiveness. The best example is General Motors, which, people don't realize this, but the collapse of General Motors is as significant as the collapse of the Soviet Union, I would say. Because back in 1955, all the Japanese car companies put together, I think there were 10 or 11 of them at the time, they produced 70,000 cars, 70,000. In the same year, General Motors produced 3.5 million cars. And how does that destroy itself into bankruptcy? And looking around the world, countries have invented various mechanisms to control that. For example, in Japan, there's this system of cross-shareholding between friendly companies. So always 30, 40, 50% of your shares are held by companies that you do business with, or your bank or your insurance company. So there's stability in shareholding, so they are less susceptible to this short-term pressure. In Germany, they have introduced this two-tier management system where the most important decisions like mergers and takeovers have to be approved by this supervisory board, which is made up of half management and half unions.
Your new book, which is doing very well in this market, is about to be published in Brazil. The original title is 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. You've told us a few things already, but tell us a few more of the things that we are not told about capitalism.
Right. Well, one thing that is related to what we have been saying is, in this book, I call the chapters things. I mean, it's a bit of wordplay, but so the chapter 22, that is thing 22, says that financial markets have to be less rather than more efficient. So what I'm trying to say with that paradoxical statement is that financial markets have become very efficient in the sense that now information flow is instant, and there's a huge global network of the financial market and so on. But it has become efficient for its own sake, but not for the rest of the economy. Because the trouble is that now the capital flows are so quick, the real economy becomes more and more short-term oriented. So actually, you need to slow down the financial market
and make it less efficient.
That's right. Yeah, this is what James Tobin, who was the Nobel economics winner of 1984, meant when he said we need to throw in some sand into this wheel of finance. Another thing that I talk about in the book is closely related to a very Brazilian issue. Too much focus has been on controlling inflation, which is only one indicator of the stability of the economy. It's price stability, but how about output stability, employment stability, or financial stability? So actually, if you look at worldwide data, not just Brazil, despite the fact that inflation has come down, we are now experiencing more and more financial crisis, and every time it gets bigger, and then we also have quite a lot of fluctuation in output and so on. So there I'm trying to argue that excessively narrow focus on prices make us lose sight of other important things in the greater concept of macroeconomic stability.
That takes into still another part of your theories and your books and your writings, which is the fact that you say at some stage all the developed countries, the rich countries of today,
that's right,
practice protectionism and industrial policy to a substantial degree. And whereas now they keep telling the others not to do it, they've done it.
Yeah, this is what I mean by kicking away the ladder, which was the title of your title of my 2002 book, the first book of mine to be translated into Portuguese in Brazil. Throughout history, all countries used tariff protection and other means of trade protection, government subsidies, government investment in the infrastructure, creation of state-owned enterprises, regulation of foreign direct investment, and so on, and all these measures to basically promote their national economic development.
And people don't realize that as much as the internet allowed for individual initiatives and all that, the internet is a creation of the state.
Absolutely.
And it's a demonstration of how the state has influence in the most capitalist society there is. Which
That's right. No, I'm really glad that you brought that point out, because people don't realize how deeply the American government is involved in the development of American economy. Of course, Americans spread this myth that it's a country of free enterprise and minimal government and so on. But from the beginning, I mean, in the 19th century, America was the most protected economy in the world. What was the tariff rate when Brazil was supposedly pursuing import substitution? It was between 30 and 40%. In America, throughout the 19th century, most of the time tariff was 40, 50% or even above. Even in the late 20th century, when American economy became the leading industrial nation and didn't need those protections to develop so-called infant industries, the American government has been deeply involved in promoting new technologies and new industries through funding of research in defense and health. For example, if you think about the industries where the Americans have international competitiveness, it's virtually all of them are creation of the American military. You talked about the internet. The computer was initially developed for the Pentagon. The semiconductor was initially funded by the US Navy. Even in the areas like health economics, bioengineering, the American government still finances 30% of pharmaceutical research. So,
And GPS is the Air Force.
Absolutely, yeah. So, you run out of fingers before you count all of them.
a lot of people in Brazil say, well, the path that South Korea took is perhaps what we should have taken. Do you agree that it could be transferred there? The lessons could be learned.
Oh, absolutely.
Different.
They are very similar. However, there were two critical differences. One is that Brazil didn't pay as much attention to export as South Korea did. And as a result, whenever the economy started growing, you experienced a balance of payment problem because as a developing country, you need to import a lot of machines and new technology.
And oil.
Yeah, and of course at the time oil. So whenever you started growing, you hit the balance of payment problems. Now, South Korea was not unfree of those problems. Don't forget that when Brazil was hit by the debt crisis, South Korea escaped it just about. It was the fourth largest foreign debtor in the world at the time after Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. But it built a lot of export industries. So it found it easy to finance all these imports. And people were more willing to lend to it because they knew that this country could export. Now, Brazil, in relative terms, neglected export industries. So that kept creating all these macroeconomic problems, which then ended up in hyperinflation. So
and the other factor?
The other factor is
education.
No. That is what every country should do. But the interesting difference is that Koreans control foreign investment a lot more heavily than Brazil did. So Brazil, for example, in developing the car industry, basically work with Ford and Fiat. but there was no ambition to grow Brazilian technology in automobile. In the Korean case, yes, we also started with joint ventures with Ford, Fiat, and General Motors. But then at some point, to be precise, in the early 1970s, the government announced that from now on, we want car companies to develop their own models. And any company that isn't willing to do that will cancel the license. By the late 1980s, Korea became one of the 6 or 7 nations in the world that could actually design its own engine. And then now it's basically operating with its own technologies. And that, I think, was a crucial difference, because the Brazilians, of course, in the beginning, it is better to rely on foreign technology because it's superior.
But at some stage, you have to do something.
That's right, but Brazil didn't do that. And I think, well, in some sectors it did, but in many sectors it didn't. And that, I think, was another crucial difference that made Brazil, which was 50% richer in the early 1960s than South Korea. Now the Korean income is more than double that of Brazil.
We're talking about rich South Korea, but you recently wrote that the people in South Korea are very unhappy to the point of actually committing suicide.
That's right. No,
Why?
unfortunately, back in 1995, our suicide rate was below the OECD average. Today, it's at 3 times the OECD average. Since 1997, the Asian financial crisis, we were forced by the IMF and also driven by internal supporters of neoliberalism, have adopted neoliberal policies on a massive scale, which has created a huge amount of problems. First, it has exposed the companies to this short-term pressures from the stock market, and it has reduced investment, it has reduced new jobs, reduced the overall growth. On top of that, it has made companies to become more vicious about the workers. I mean, we, of course, never had very nice capitalists in the sense of treating the workers well, but now they become...
It's getting worse.
Yeah, because they have to create all this short-term profit. How do you do that? I mean, basically sack anyone you can think of and rehire some of those people that you need as agency workers with no protection, no pensions, nothing. And the wages at half the level of regular workers. So now we have the highest rate of people without permanent job contract in the OECD. 60% of our workers do not have permanent contract. They are under immense pressure. No wonder they are unhappy.
And that's where you got the suicides.
Yeah.
Do you think a bit of that, especially the suicides even, seem to be increasing in Europe under this austerity programs?
Oh, absolutely,
so I think it's a similar phenomenon.
Yeah. No, you know, I mean, one unfortunate assumption in the standard economic model is that they assume that human beings are like any other commodity. So the conclusion is that you put more pressure, they'll produce more. But we are not like that. I mean, when you make people's life insecure instead of performing better, they get depressed, they become unhappy, and their productivity falls. So this is an unfortunate consequence of treating human beings as